Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall. Now I'd like to introduce our host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Thanks, Don. Hi, welcome, everyone. This is our continuing series of town hall meetings, Ask Me Anything sessions on the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program specifically. My guest today is Jeff Trinidad from L3Harris Corporation. We are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the defense industrial base, and we hope that you find them useful. Our focus as a managed service provider, our focus is on organizations seeking certification primarily. So audience members, if you have some questions today, please do send those in. Use the Q&A feature within Zoom to send those in, and I will try to ask Jeff as many of those questions as time allows here on the call today. Start with introduction of Jeff Trinidad, our guest. He's an officer of the United States Army Reserves. He's also the Director of Supply Chain Risk Management for L3Harris. Jeff has been on the front lines, both in the physical world and the cyber world, in this career which mixes multiple military deployments with some civilian defense work. In the CMMC world, Jeff is currently leading an initiative within L3Harris to ensure that their supply chain is up to speed on cybersecurity and that they're maintaining a close hold on all the valuable intellectual property that's developed by L3Harris and its partners. So, Jeff, thanks very much for joining us today. We definitely appreciate your service. And although today we're going to focus on your civilian work, the military work you've done, vitally important to the success of our nation. So I want to thank you for that. Our audience today, mostly organizations seeking certification, as I mentioned. So likely some of your own suppliers are here. All these folks are tracking CMMC very closely and have been, in many cases attending these sessions to kind of hear what's new with CMMC. Since most of these companies will subcontract either to L3Harris or other large integrators, today we're going to address some questions about what they can expect from you as their customer, from other customers they may work for, and what you expect of them. So, but before we dive into that, I guess I'd like to start with a quick question about your role personally. You're a security practitioner and a soldier. In this role you've taken with L3Harris, you're focused more on helping others rather than security within L3Harris's internal security operations. So, bit of a shift. What is it about supply chain risk challenges that attracted you to take this position, and what are you trying to accomplish or hoping to accomplish personally with this?
Well, Ed, first off, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank everybody in advance for attending today. I think this is a huge step and a great step forward in our CMMC compliance, efforts. So, as you mentioned, most of my career has been in the corporate security world, and a lot of those efforts focus internally with our stakeholders being our employees. Supply chain, making that transition allowed me to not only engage our internal stakeholders, but also work with our external partners and i.e. our suppliers. So with risk management, the concept of supply chain risk management and even cyber compliance is nothing new. However, we know that cyber is evolving, risk management is evolving, and the risks that we face on a day-to-day basis continue to increase. So I really like the idea, first of all, of being at the forefront of this effort in what we call Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and be able to work in a large company like L3Harris with the number of our suppliers to really build that strategy over the next couple of years of how we're going to implement and maintain all our requirements for DoD contracts.
So CMMC, I mean, yeah, it's new, it's exciting, right? This is the farthest reaching cybersecurity initiative that, in my opinion, that we've seen so far from the government. The promise of CMMC is to raise the security bar across over 300,000 companies that make up the defense industrial base. So that's a really ambitious goal. Since it's new, since it's exciting, it's getting a ton of attention right now. But help us put that in context in terms of overall supply chain risk management. How important is CMMC as a part of what L3Harris is doing overall to manage your supply chain and risks within that supply chain?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I can tell you right now, it is probably our #1 priority. As I previously mentioned, supply chain risk management has been around for a while. So we're constantly looking at the vetting of our suppliers, doing our due diligence, and identifying those risks that could interrupt our supply chain. Over the last decade, cybersecurity has become a big piece of that, and CMMC has just kind of highlighted the need for that requirement and that risk. So I will tell you that it's a big portion of what I do on a day-to-day basis. It's probably consumed the last 6 months of our supply chain risk management team. It probably will over the next 6 months as we move towards that tentative implementation date. But right now we're just trying to build around practices around mitigating risk. We know that there's the NIST 800-17-1 CMMC, and we wanted to refocus our efforts on cybersecurity risk mitigation within our supply chain system. So it's not unique, but we understand that we do have to work with our suppliers, which is a huge monumental task, and it helps us gain a bigger perspective on the risk not only within our company, but our suppliers as well.
I want to ask you a little bit about the role of L3Harris as a large company. DoD we've heard from DoD that they pretty much realize that the large prime contractors, certainly L3Harris, others, you guys have been doing cybersecurity for a couple of decades now, and for the most part are doing a great job. In most companies, it's a fairly mature function at this point, but not so much for some of the folks in the supply chain, smaller companies or newer companies, newer to defense work. We've heard an expectation from the DoD that they're expecting that these larger companies have some obligation to guide and mentor their suppliers to help them to raise the bar, make sure that CMMC really reaches everybody and achieves that promise I mentioned earlier. So I know L3Harris is taking this very seriously, and you've been doing a lot of outreach in terms of education, answering questions from your suppliers, et cetera. Can you give us a kind of a quick rundown of what this initiative looks like? What are you doing to enable your suppliers to succeed, which I guess obviously ultimately enables you to succeed in pulling teams together to bid on contracts? What does that overall initiative look like for L3Harris?
So as a major aerospace and defense contractor, we have somewhat of a responsibility to be an innovator and an early adopter and take charge and lead the way in this process. So we realized that probably about a year ago. And just due to the size of our organization, excuse me, and the amount of suppliers, we had to get started with our outreach, working with our suppliers and getting ahead of the curve. So about 6 months ago, we partnered with NeoSystems, one of our partners, and I think that's key to this process is having good partnerships to build an initial outreach and education program for our supply chain partners. Really over the last 3 months, we've developed a 5-part webinar series that covered almost everything that we know today about CMMC. We've already conducted 3 webinars talking about an overview of what CMMC is, kind of the process and some general expectations. We've gone over that level 1 compliance requirement, which I think a lot of suppliers will fall into if they're not, handling CUI or ITAR level data, but they are supporting the DoD. And then we recently, as of 2 weeks ago, took a deep dive into the level 3, which I think is going to encompass a majority of DoD contractors out there. We still have 2 more webinars to go, which will go over levels 4 and 5, which are some more of your advanced controls. And then we're going to provide a follow-up on kind of how to prepare for an audit. So we're really trying to engage our suppliers, kind of provide that training, provide an overview. And within each of those webinars, similar to what we're doing here today, there is a question and answer session. So they can ask a lot of the questions that they have and get better prepared for what's upcoming. So, for our suppliers, whether you're a supplier with L3Harris or you have a prime contractor, if they have something similar, I would just recommend that, you participate in any training events that are out there, whether it's through NeoSystems or one of your prime contractors. And then, the great thing about what we have in place is that if I am new and I just register today through our portal, I can go in and record, view the recorded webinars that were hosted over the last 3 weeks. So it's a lot of material, it's a lot of good information, and that's where we're at today. We've also, I mentioned the portal, developed that in conjunction with NeoSystems, so our suppliers can go on there and find out articles on what CMMC is, the most recent updates, things from the industry. Obviously, I mentioned training, And we also are offering our suppliers a compliance gap assessment. So today you can go in, you can assess your readiness, and it's a free tool that you can use to help get prepared.
That's good. I think CMMC is new, and so we've seen definitely people have a need just to know how it works and what's expected, and so we've been, as you know, doing a lot of that work as far as outside of what we're doing with L3 Harris, a lot of outreach work. We want to make sure people are smart on it. As you've been doing these events that you mentioned, what kind of questions are you hearing? What's the feedback from the suppliers? Any common themes as far as concerns that they're expressing, or questions that you see kind of over and over? Like, what are some of the strong messages coming back from the supply chain?
Yeah, sure. So in all transparency, anytime you have a new process, there's going to be concerns. There's going to be a lot of questions. We're not hearing a lot of, okay, we're ready for this and let's go. There's a lot of concern out there, and we recognize that. And I think that just kind of adds to the importance of outreach and education. So during our sessions, we have received a lot of feedback. I think we get over 100 questions, per webinar, if not more. And they're all different. Everybody's, has questions based on their industry and what they do to support L3 Harris. So just a few questions that we regularly get is, when do I have to be certified, right? And so what we tell our suppliers is that is coming down. It's a 5-year rollout. However, you'll know it when an RFP comes from L3 Harris for you to, support a contract, and at that point you will have to be certified. So that's a huge concern from our supply base. How much is it going to cost me? With every business, right? You're looking for
Sure.
what's the cost and out-of-pocket cost. Now the good news is we reassure that there is a bill back to the government to implement some of these strategies. However, it could impact business, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So cost is the other one, and then obviously what level do I need to be? And we can kind of look at the type of material you handle, and there's some ways. Once again, if you do a self-assessment, you'll have probably can anticipate what level you'll be, but you won't really know until that contract flows down from your prime contractor. So I think that puts a little people on edge as far as what strategy they should take. Other bigger macro level concerns is this actually going to happen? We've seen with government programs in the past where it gets so close to the execution date, and then something like COVID-19 comes and it keeps delaying it. Even in the contracting world, an issue comes up and it delays the contract for 3 years. So a lot of these, our suppliers are saying, hey, we got it. Thanks for teaching us, but are we going to have this conversation next year, or is this something that we're going to have to readdress in 5 years? Is this sustainable? We've had multiple iterations of cybersecurity compliance requirements over the last couple of decades. So, we keep hearing this is the latest and greatest. This is going to be the assessment of all assessments and the end all be all. But I think there's some hesitation out there from suppliers, and they just want to understand, is this sustainable? Is this the long haul, or is this something that we're going to jump through hoops to do over the next 2 to 3 years, and then something better will come out, and we're going to have to pivot and adapt to that as well. So a lot of questions, as we are new to this process as well, it's challenging because we do not have all the answers, but we try the best we can. And I think that's why it's important to have these partnerships that you can kind of go through this journey together.
Cool. You mentioned a minute ago, speaking of kind of cost and difficulty, right? You mentioned that you think the majority that you're seeing so far are going to need to be level 3. And that's a little bit different than what the DoD has said. They said that they think the majority is going to be level 1, and only those who handle CUI, which I think is a fairly small number, would need to be level 3. And they've in fact kind of drawn a comparison between level 3 and those who are cleared defense contractors today, and that knowing this total number is way less than the 300,000 total in the DIB. So it makes maybe sense that because you're near the top of the food chain, you're going to obviously have direct access as L3 Harris, but those people who are your tier 1 suppliers may be skewed more towards those who do handle the sensitive data and would need level 3. And maybe as you work your way down the supply chain, there's more folks down there who might have a
Sorry about that.
Might have a need for lower. Yeah, your video went sideways there for a minute. But So maybe that's sort of a selection bias that the folks that you're dealing with that are, like say, contracting directly with you, maybe skewed in favor of level 3, which that's a tough bar. I mean, it's a big change. So I kind of want to ask about, how big is that lift for those companies that you're seeing? How big of a change is this? CMMC builds on some requirements that already exist in the DFARS, and the DoD has said, hey, if you're already under the DFARS and have to meet NIST 800-171, then CMMC only adds a few new things, 20. It's not that big of a lift. So we think if you've already met those earlier ones, it shouldn't be that hard. What's your sense of how well suppliers have done in complying with those existing requirements, so that as this new thing comes along, it's either a small step or a big step? What's your sense there?
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think from a DoD as a whole, most suppliers will fall under that level 1, profile. As an aerospace and defense contractor, we anticipate we're going to have to be at a level 3, and a lot of the, tier 1 contract suppliers we work with are going to have to be similar, just based on our initial analysis. I do think it's going to be a little bit, I think it's achievable over the long run. However, I think there is going to be some challenges, for level 3, though more complex. As you mentioned, most of the contractors and suppliers that we deal with already have some type of cybersecurity basic hygiene in place. There may be some areas that they need to improve on. However, they've probably already been down this road before based on previous cybersecurity initiatives. So not a huge concern there. I think where the concern will lie is with those tier 1 suppliers who require level 1, the small businesses that require, cybersecurity, who may not have an IT infrastructure, who may not have kind of those policies and procedures in place. And though for us as a prime contractor, we think, oh, these are the basics. When you own a small business, we understand that can be challenging and tough, and it may take a little bit more time to implement.
So specifically for those companies that are, where this is something brand new, right? There's been some concern that CMMC is a barrier to entry, if you will, for small and mid-sized businesses, maybe that haven't done business with the DoD in the past, and that it might scare some of them off, might actually, reduce our access to innovation and such like that. That's very important to other factors of our national success, right? So, these cyber hygiene requirements of CMC, I mean, there's no question that they're above typical commercial practice. Is there anything L3Harris is doing specifically to enable those small businesses for whom this is brand new? It may represent a pretty significant challenge if it's not something they've done before. Is there anything you're doing to enable them to make sure that they either enter or stay in defense work where we need their contributions?
Yeah, and so we are. I think it's a very good and valid question. I think that's where a lot of the concern comes from, is those level 1 vendors. So, what we're doing is really focusing on our outreach and education. And it really helps twofold. 1, maybe puts them at ease. But 2, it really helps us gain a better understanding of what their challenges are. The Q&A sessions that we have during our webinars kind of highlight some of those issues, whether it's cost, whether it's, a process that they need to put in place, or the timeline that they're dealing with. So, I mentioned in the portal that we have, there's a self-assessment that each supplier can go in and complete. Well, that information not only helps them, but it also helps us, because we can work with, Ed and your team to build a strategy that helps our identify what those gaps are. So, for example, if we get a bunch of our suppliers to, 60% respond, and we just say, hey, policy and procedures is the biggest gap. Well, now we can reach out and then do training on how to develop a policy. We may even develop templates of SSP or policy document that we can share with our suppliers to help get them started. But it really starts with that self-assessment and that communication process, so we can understand what their challenges are and then work to develop kind of that strategy on how we assist them. The second thing we're doing more strategically, we don't have anything in place today, But as part of our strategy is try to identify those tools and those different vendors that provide systems that we can use and work with our suppliers to help them along. So if we want to look at a vendor that provides encrypted data file sharing, well, now I've just helped 60 of the CMMC requirements for level 3. That's a huge help to our supply base. So as we evaluate potential vendors, tools, systems, we don't only keep L3Harris in mind. We're looking at how this can benefit our suppliers, reduce their overall cost, because then it becomes a win-win situation. We help get them compliant, while at the same time we're strengthening the resiliency of our supply chain, so that when we do get an RFP, we can go back and say, hey, we're ready to bid on this and we're ready to go.
Thanks, Jeff. I want to ask about timeline. I've got a couple of questions from the audience asking about the rollout schedule. There's been concern about that maybe not yet being announced exactly which contracts are going to be going to CMMC and when. So recognizing that it's early and there's been no dates announced for specific contracts, what are some of the impacts to L3Harris of this 5-year phased rollout that the DoD's proposed? The timing is determined by contract award. How closely are you at L3Harris tracking that timeline of when companies are going to be certified? Like what are you looking for there to make sure that you don't get caught in the lurch as this rollout comes down the pike?
So first, I will say, and I think this is great advice, it's a continuous process, so you have to get ready now. That's something we started 6 months ago. We know that it's going to start with a single RFP. Most likely in the coming year. It could be February of 21, it could be June. And that's the challenge that we've recognized. So getting ahead and getting started now allows us to be ready when that time comes. Also understanding that it's going to expand over the next 5 years. So it kind of goes back to looking at our current contract process, tracking their certification status, doing our own initial analysis to see when we anticipate what their anticipated levels are from each supplier, looking at contract dates to see when contracts renew, our research and development efforts, and new ventures that our business development team is looking to tackle and prioritizing them and it helps kind of us to build a roadmap of our suppliers and our own internal roadmap to compliance. So I say all that it's difficult, and I would welcome if anybody has solved this problem. But right now, since we don't have a solid date, hey, June 1st of 2021, this goes into effect. It's great that we have 5 years, but you just don't know. So we're preparing now.
And I'll say that most of the people who have been attending our events are the early adopters, right? These are folks who are taking an interest now. They see CMMC as possible competitive advantage by getting it early. So they're enthusiastic for the most part. That's why they're here listening in. But there's others that are sitting on the sidelines, saying, hey, it's too soon to invest in new security until we see if this is real, if it's really going to happen. It sounds like your advice is don't wait. What should those folks who are skeptical and don't want to make big investments, what should they be doing now so that they're not caught flat-footed later, at the time when this does become a requirement in contracts?
So the easiest response to that is don't wait. However, that's easier said than done, for a lot of suppliers out there. And we understand that not everybody has the robust staff and the resources and capabilities like a big aerospace and defense contractor, Boeing, Lockheed, L3Harris, to take on this kind of effort. I would say it starts with your partnerships. So build your partners, see who your competimates are, see what they're doing, network, benchmark. That will kind of help give you a sense of what the environment is within, your industry. Communicate with your supply chain. So though we have suppliers, they have, suppliers as well. So those are tier 2 and 3 suppliers. Start communicating with them now. That way you have a common understanding and you've already established that communication base. So that way when it starts to roll out, you're ready to go. if nothing else, get smart on the process. Understand what your requirements are. Understand what you're expected to go through. And that's why I can't say enough the self-assessment. I mean, that's really where the meat is right now. There's no penalty to do it. It's a self-assessment, and it allows you to see where you're at and find those gaps. And at a minimum, with no money cost, you can start building your strategy. So if I do a self-assessment and I go, hey, I just need to write a policy and I just have to, create an access control system, maybe I might have more flexibility to wait. However, if I do an assessment and I, talk to myself and go, hey, I'm working with a contractor, I have 3 contracts, we transfer CUI data, I've done the self-assessment, I'm not doing so well. Maybe it's time to, expedite your strategy or spend that investment to, partner with a vendor who can help you along. But you have to do that. It really starts with that assessment process. And, for our suppliers, I, tell them just go to the portal, register. You get a lot of information there. You get free training, and it allows you to do that self-assessment piece.
So, Jeff, a couple of questions coming in from the audience are about the nature of that self-assessment tool, how people can get access to it, how they can get access to the webinar series you mentioned. So these are resources that you're making available to your suppliers, right? So if people are already a supplier of L3Harris, they should have been invited, or they should have access to it. Is there any way for anybody outside that to have access? Tell us how that works.
At this time, I'm not aware of anybody outside of L3Harris having access to that portal. I know for our suppliers, it's pretty easy. We've collected, data of all our supply base and sent out invitations to that portal so that they could register. It's a very user-friendly, simple portal process. You don't have to, log into 3 different websites. You register, you log in, and everything's right there for you. So it's kind of like a block website to where you'll have frequently asked questions in one, you'll have the self-assessment in another, you'll have the webinars in another block. So very easy to navigate. And it'd be nice if there was a system that, all suppliers could, go to and utilize those resources. But I think that's why it's key to communicate with your prime suppliers, your tier 1 suppliers, to see what resources they have available, and then maybe something that you can attach yourself to.
I mean, it sounds like you're doing a lot to help out your ecosystem. So for folks on the call who are part of that, yeah, you should have, or someone in your company should have, whoever is a kind of a primary contact, hopefully has seen that. I will say that there are some of the same educational resources available on the NeoSystems website that are available to anyone, but not not the self-assessment or some of the L3Harris specific things that Jeff mentioned. So if you're not part of the L3Harris ecosystem, yeah, hopefully talk to your primes, as Jeff mentioned, and you may be able to get access to some of that. Jeff, we just have time for kind of one more question here before we wrap up, and I wanted to kind of give you a chance to make a suggestion to the folks that are driving CMMC. So right now, the DoD and the CMMC accreditation body, those folks are working super hard to flesh out all the details. They have done a lot of work. I've been impressed with how much they have invited input from industry, from us as practitioners, from you guys as essentially, the regulated entities here, to make sure that they understand what the real world impacts are going to be of the things they're putting together. Do you have any advice or suggestions for those that are crafting CMMC? Anything about the current program that you'd like to see amplified, or something that you'd like to see change? What's your number one suggestion back to the CMMC powers that be?
I would say the number one is continuously evaluate the program, incorporate reciprocity where you can, and just streamline the process. Oftentimes we see, big complex processes similar to CMMC get rolled out, and sometimes we don't talk to or get input from, those level 1, suppliers. And there's often a lot of redundancy with other systems. So, we face that challenge to where we're sending out 2 and 3 requests for information from our suppliers, and a lot of it's, redundant information. And then just based on the feedback from our suppliers, I think continually communicate with the industry, provide those free resources as you can, and continue to, put information out there that all suppliers and all businesses can go to easily, get information, and stay updated so this doesn't come up as a surprise for anybody.
Great, Jeff. Thanks. Jeff, thanks for joining us today. Audience, thank you for your time and joining us. I hope this was useful information. L3 Harris is definitely doing a lot of work to embrace CMMC and help their supply chain to be successful. So Jeff, thanks for sharing those details with us. Please join us again. We are doing these on a weekly basis, these town hall meetings. Our next session will be Wednesday, August 5th, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. So keep an eye out for the invitations for that. And I believe next week our guest will be a member of the CMMC accreditation body. We've had very good support from them in keeping us up to date on what to expect, what's coming that's new, and what to expect soon from CMMC as this unfolds, and we all make sure we comply with it. So thanks everyone. Have a good day.